So, today we're going to be talking about the gender pay gap. And, actually, do we want to have intros like that, or do we want to have our usual?
Yeah, you should tell us what we're going to be talking about and then pause for like 15 to 20 seconds every time. Hey, what's going on? This is another episode of A Strong Disagree. My name is Trey. The dude you just heard is Joe. The other guy coming up is Dan. As mentioned, we're going to be talking about the gender pay gap today. There's nothing really happening in the news about it. We just think it sucks, and it affects like 51% of the humans in this country. So we believe it's worth looking into. We hope you learned something today. As always, we hope you like the show. We hope you like your life. And here is some free entertainment.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
No, do your best NPR impression.
So, originally when we were trying to do this episode, we were thinking that we were going to do, continue to play conservatives devil's advocate. One of us play the conservative and then the other two play the liberals. But then we realized that we didn't entirely agree on our liberal positions, and so it would just be awkward. But I was supposed to do the conservative, so I did a whole bunch of research. So here's my summary of the whole gender pay gap issue from all the way on the right to all the way on the left. So almost nobody debates the fact that if you add up the average amount of money that men and women make in the United States for the job, just in general, women make a ton less. They make about 77 cents to the dollar. But that's for a lot of reasons. There aren't nearly, for a while at least, there weren't nearly as many women in the workforce. They've continued to not have as high of positions. They don't hold as many managerial positions or CEO positions or just generally aren't getting promoted in the same way, maybe. There is a lot of argument over what those numbers mean and what's important about those numbers. So 77 cents is the average, the average median salary for full-time working men versus full-time working women. And one of the things that's lacking in that number is that there are a lot of women who just work part-time jobs, and there are a lot of men, for that matter, who just work part-time jobs who are not counted. And it would be really worrisome if we found out that women were working extra hours and still getting paid less. So it's important to look at numbers like that. And when we include part-time work, and try to correct the number for hourly work, it comes out to about 88 cents an hour. So women make about 88 cents an hour for hourly work compared to what men do. But that doesn't include a lot of other stuff that could be potentially good or bad for the numbers and is important in comparison. So that's not comparing for the same held position. That's not comparing for the amount of experience somebody has. That's not comparing for if the degree that the person holds matters in the job that they're in. Things like that. So there's all these things that we want to look at because, again, if we found out that women were making a bunch less than men and they were more qualified and they were working more hours and they were more experienced and they had better degrees, etc., still making less money, that'd be pretty messed up. But when we look at those numbers, the gender pay gap actually shrinks a little bit. So generally, when those types of things are looked at, the number is about 95 cents. So what that means is that if you correct for hourly work, if you try to include as many people of different types of work in this job, if you try to make them as comparable as possible, a woman working the same job with the same experience for the same amount of years with the same degree as a man, there's about a 5% gap that we don't necessarily know where it comes from. So that's basically what the science says. Some people think that that's bullshit, that a lot of stuff hasn't been looked at and the number is actually more like 90. Some people think 95 is bullshit, and they think that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's being ignored, and the number is actually perfectly even. So as you can guess, generally speaking, conservatives think that the number is closer to even. And generally speaking, as you can guess, liberals tend to think that 95 is not as good of an estimate. And even if it is a good estimate, they still have a lot of problems with it. So the conservative position, in short summary, is not that they don't give a fuck about women. Women are dumb and they belong in the kitchen. Although some conservatives do think that, which we need to remember.
And to them I say, nuanced.
Yeah, to them I say, good luck. But basically their position is that the Civil Rights Act was passed, and the Civil Rights Act addresses this. It makes it illegal. And so if you find that your employer is not paying you based on your gender or your race or some other reason that's protected, you can sue them. And that is about where they stop. So as you imagine, conservatives generally want smaller government. They want less rules. They want less restrictions. Maybe they have some good reasons for that. They say they do. Maybe they have some devious reasons for that. Liberals say they do. But regardless, that's kind of where they stand. They think a lot of the laws that are kind of pushed by liberals are a bit onerous on businesses. They think some of them don't do what liberals want them to do. They think some of them are sexist or racist in the sense that they actually privilege women, or they privilege a minority, regardless of the history of oppression or racism or sexism. So, in general, if you think it doesn't really matter if the number is 95 or 97 or 92, it's a really big problem, and we need to do something about it. If you think it's not just that number that matters, it's the fact that there aren't as many women in the workforce. It's not just that number that matters, it's also the fact that women don't hold as many higher positions. And you want to fix those problems actively through the government, you're probably liberal on this issue. If you think that the best way to deal with that issue is through your local church, you're probably conservative. And if you want to repeal parts of the Civil Rights Act, you're almost definitely conservative. And that's kind of the breakdown. So the breakdown happens at, do we want to expand things more than the Civil Rights Act, generally speaking? So, with all that said, we maybe have some discussion on the numbers. Yes? No?
Well, I guess there's one other major conservative talking point that I consider to be pretty compelling that you didn't touch on.
Yeah, sure. Go
That I
for it.
mentioned. So, like, if I'm a business owner, I want to pay my employees as little as I can while still being able to maintain an effective workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm incentivized to do that as a business because that is part of what eats into my profits. If that's the case, then if there is a woman on my staff who has a job and is making less than men on my staff that have the same job, and maybe they have the same experience, what exactly am I to do to remedy that situation? Should I approach that woman and just offer her a raise to bring her in line with her peers? Or should I wait until she is asking for more money or wants more of a raise than I initially offer her or something like that? It seems to me like it should be no different just because it's a woman that I have to approach her and offer her a raise just to bring her in line with her peers because she happened to not negotiate as strongly when she first took the position, for instance.
Yeah, that's for sure. Conservatives would definitely say that. Yeah, and they also think, if you're making the business accountable for these differences, they are having to spend money to follow the law and to enforce the law, and therefore also losing something out of their pocket on those things. So it's not only just approaching the woman; it's like the whole shebang of like worrying about it is too onerous for them.
On the liberal side, there was another major point that I don't feel like we touched on in that summary, and that is the so-called motherhood penalty, where if you look at lifetime earnings for a woman as compared to a man, both of whom have children, both of whom work in the same job, you'll see this crazy dent where the woman has her first child and like her earnings never quite recover to where they would be if she had never had that first child, or if she was a man and had her first child. Like they've compared this data pretty thoroughly. So I found that to be pretty interesting. It seems pretty clear that women are passed up for raises or passed up for promotions as a result of going out on maternity leave. Whereas I'll point out that when I returned from paternity leave, I actually got a raise that same year. So
yeah, men's
obviously that's anecdotal, but I'll just mention that.
Yeah, when you look at pay between men and women, the first child hurts females' pay over time, but there's a bump in men's pay when they have children, which is some straight up Leave It to Beaver shit. I mean, that is like straight up Leave It to Beaver shit.
Well, obviously, if the woman knew what was best, she'd be at home with the kids, taking care of them.
Oh,
so.
dear fucking God.
Well, yeah.
Obviously, that was a joke.
No, I know. I'm always thinking about the sound bites. I'm never thinking about the sound bites when I'm talking, but the second you guys start talking, I'm like waiting for it every time.
Just me.
Yeah. So, and then I think on the liberal side, it's often thought that there's not much debate about what exactly the problem is and what we're going to do about it. And it seems like, to me, that there's a lot of push between the left, like the more extreme left, the more far left. Do we say far left? Why do you say extreme left? That's a conservative thing. Far left. So far left. There's a push from the far left to kind of distance themselves from people with more moderate positions and more moderate ways of dealing with this issue. And so it often seems like those people are being called conservative or those people are being called sexist. And that's unfortunate. It might be fortunate. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe we can get to the bottom of that. But there's a lot of debate on the left currently about these things that it seems like sometimes people are unaware of, that we don't really agree on what the deal is and how we're going to solve it and what's fair and not fair in that field. So
Maybe you could talk for a second, Trey.
I'm sorry.
Just filling up your Easter baskets there?
Yep.
Very sorry. Very sorry.
So, yeah, I know that that's certainly a thing that happens on the extremes of both parties, right? They will characterize anyone that disagrees with them even slightly as like the most extreme hateful person ever. You know, they'll instantly label them as a sexist the second they say one lick about how the gender gap isn't quite 80 cents or something like that.
Right, for sure.
And the same thing happens with comments about race and social tensions in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think that we should necessarily vilify that every time. I do think that there is some justification in some ways because, I mean, the idea of institutionalized racism or institutionalized inequality for women is a thing. Like, I mean, for many years, there was a period where we did oppress women, where we didn't let them vote, where we didn't let them have the same kind of jobs, where they couldn't work at universities and things like that. And just because we've changed the policy doesn't mean that everyone who was a member of that policy and kind of took part in that system is completely out of the system and their influence is gone. So I don't think that they're completely off base to suspect foul play, especially when you'll hear clever conservatives use these as talking points and they'll use the same language, right? So, like, it's kind of hard to tell the difference sometimes between someone who is actually asking an honest question or actually speaking in good faith on the topic and someone who is using a talking point that sounds better and is easier to summarize on the evening news than a conversation that's, you know, nuanced about all the ins and outs of this particular topic.
Yeah, I think it's always hard to figure out what's being sensationalized and not. So for me, the fact that Jerry Seinfeld won't even go to college campuses to do stand-up comedy, possibly like one of the most PC comics there is, just because of how offended students get and how different the crowd is in accepting comedy there, kind of makes me think that conservatives are clearly using what's happening on college campuses to, like, demonize the left and call us fucking crazy. But if Jerry Seinfeld, I like, it's not zero. It's like it is possibly a problem. And so if these types of people who are saying these things about gender in the workplace are getting fired from companies like Google, right? Like, maybe it is a big conversation that we're not seeing, a big disagreement that we're not seeing that is happening, right? So, it's not that I think this is like an insane problem necessarily, but I definitely think, I don't know, I've certainly talked to many people who just kind of like laying out the science of like certain issues like really, really deeply offends them. They've never heard the science before. They've never heard certain numbers before. And me and them are on the same team. Like, we probably want to do this, the same exact, pass the same exact laws, vote for the same exact people, like think they want the exact same outcomes. So it's just weird to have that much, miscommunication just anecdotally, and then to see it kind of being played out like on the bigger stage, you know? Like, I think it's the news media's job to play up shit like this, but like, I don't know. It's worrisome, to say the least.
Just to kind of cap on what was happening there, you're saying one is the discussion about, is there a gap, a meaningful gap, and do we need to do something about it? And then you've gone on to another question of it, which is, can we even talk about it? And is there a problem about how we're agreeing or disagreeing to even have the discussion about a difference between the two? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about with Seinfeld not coming to campus, is that these issues of PC culture, like
I mean, I'm not trying to take
people bringing it up.
Like, you know, I'm not trying to take the conservative position that like I should be able to run around and say really offensive things and not be publicly ostracized for them, right? But it's clear that in these discussions, from my personal experience and from the experience of professional famous people I would respect, like Jerry Seinfeld, that some of even the simpler, more PC conversations are even kind of hard to have. So,
Like
that's all to say
specifically,
that-
like specifically, you're saying bringing
Yeah,
up
like
the fact
specific-
that the number is maybe not 77 or
right
discussion about that
yeah.
number.
Yeah, so I have had, and again, I don't want to base this on anecdotal stuff, but I have had conversations where I've been called sexist for saying that 70 cents isn't for equal work. And I just think that's clearly true. It's not that I think that, it's that that's what the numbers say. The people who released 77 didn't even say it was for equal work. They said it was for median salary between men and women. So I've personally had that experience where it's hard to have that conversation. And it's just weird because like me and this person want the same things or on the same side, and yet I'm being called, sexist, or just really, really, maybe even not being called sexist, just really offending and upsetting somebody just based on this number. And so, yeah, it's a hard conversation to have sometimes. I'd like us to have it well and clearly and see where we agree and disagree. But
All right, so first, to begin with, though, let's set aside the possibility / probability that you're getting called sexist for other
for other
there
reasons,
are other
yeah.
things
I might
happening
be
about the way that you're
misspeaking
talking to
properly
these
or,
people who are saying
being
that.
real loud or abusive in my language.
But let's assume that part of it has to do with the fact that if there is a number and the number seems offensive, which is like if women are making 77 cents on the dollar for compared to what men make, that is offensive, right? There's like something is wrong there if that's the reality. And so if we try to walk that number, anything that you do, whether it's right or wrong,
right.
if your goal is to, at the end of that, say the number is actually less offensive, then maybe there's a red flag goes up, or people are going to be on their heels about it, because it would seem like you may be setting up for an argument to say that there isn't a problem with the amount of money that women make, or there isn't anything that needs to be done about it, or even worse, which is one of the arguments that centers around like, women make less because they want to be at home having kids, or they make less because they're biologically not prepared to compete in the high-paying environment, or any of those other things.
Right.
Right. So it's like your first step and the first step of someone who is a horrible person are the same when you're trying to get to a number that is more closely related to reality.
Well, I think that there's a way to approach the conversation, hopefully, without offending people. And I think you just have to start with like, okay, so start with their number, 77%, and you explain, okay, but I mean, that's like comparing like a lawyer who lives in New York City to a high school teacher that lives in Arkansas.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's the exact same thing that someone who was hoping to get more women to leave the workforce and be at home as some kind of sister wife raising 50 kids. Like, the problem is, from Joe's argument and the argument of the worst kind of person in a liberal's mind, have to start at the same place, which is tearing down the number that's 77%.
Yeah, for sure. And
which is, if in like 140 characters, it's really hard when the first thing you have to do as a liberal or a conservative going the other way, it's really hard when the first thing you have to do is say the first point of the other side, because we very rarely get to point number 2, or like ever get to point number 6. So it's like the first thing you say is that, and it's like we're having a fight. You don't ever get to the thing that separates you in this situation, your position from conservative positions, which I would imagine is that there is something that needs to be done about this problem, or that it is a problem. But it's
Yeah, for
like
sure.
if you get
I'm
144
liberal, i.e.,
characters,
yeah.
the first thing you have to say is 77 isn't a very true or realistic picture of what is actually happening.
Yeah. Well, just to be clear, it's a true and realistic
Yeah, it's actually what's
picture
happening.
of a different problem.
Right.
And that, like, yeah, it's like that's still a problem. It's just we can talk factually about that problem and then every other problem down the line. And yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to have the conversation that way. I think that's like one of my big reflection points is that I have to start, unfortunately, with really making it clear that we agree on the end stuff. But I just want to point out that maybe what you said about that number isn't entirely true and maybe confuses other people and enrages other people when you use it that way, or is just not correct, and it might be nice for you to have the correct number, you know. But yeah, no, all along the way, like,
just any of the various forms of mansplaining is what you need to do there. That's what needs to happen. Well, let's clear the number up then. Okay, let's get into it. It's difficult for people to talk. They get in a fight. Let's get into it. One number is just in total, women bring less money home than men do in total.
yeah, which is a problem.
Which is
right?
is probably a problem. The bigger the scope, the less of a problem it is, right? If the more people that you include in that, the less of a problem it might be, because it might be that, you know, however money's coming in, if everything's cool and women are making 77 cents total, or they're bringing home X amount of money, 77 trillion, and men make 100 trillion, but everything's cool, then it's maybe not a problem. But when you talk to one specific woman who is looking at her life and is making less than a man in a similar position, then it's like a really shitty thing. So it's like the closer that you get down, the more we know it's a problem, right? It could be that there are X amount of women who are choosing to stay home and raise children, or X amount of women who just like are independently wealthy, or whatever reason aren't making money, right? Or it could be that there's a bunch more men in the country. We know that that's not the actual truth. We know that there are more women here, which is like adds to that problem when you start looking at it. But in general, they're bringing home less. When we look at it a little bit closer and we try to compare full-time workers or bi-hourly, if we try to look at the difference between two people who work in the same job, we see that number is not as far a gap, right? We see that it's maybe somewhere between 90 or 95 when we factor in as much as we can to compare a guy and a girl who are as close as possible. When we get them to be as close as, I'm not going to say as close as possible because I think we're doing a poor job of it, but when we try to get them as close as possible, that number looks a little bit more like 90, 95.
Yeah.
Which begs the first question, what amount of money could your boss tell you that he was going to pay you next week? How much less than he's paying you now and expecting you to do the same amount of work? What's that number that would get you to still go to work? If your boss just said like, hey, I'm going to just pay you 5% less from now on. I want you to do the exact same thing. Also, everyone else here is going to make the exact same amount of money. I'm just going to give you 5% less. Would you still come to work after that? Is it 4%? Is it 7%? It's interesting to know that number. I would guess that my number is fucking 0%. No amount. It doesn't matter if I'm making $725 or $15 million a year. If someone came in and said, I'm going to pay you less, you're doing the exact same thing. Everyone else is making the same amount of money. No way. But realistically, for most people, it's probably what? Joe, what's the number? I'm not going to ask you, Joe.
Yeah,
You don't have the history to answer this question. Dan.
What do you mean by that?
Dan, as a full-time worker, what amount of money could you make next week that you'd still put your shoes on and brush your teeth and show up on Monday morning?
Okay, Well, that's a good question.
And I'm asking you specifically because I have like a way I can say fuck you to 1% because my living situation's different. You've got a wife and kids.
Right.
With that, knowing that, what's the amount of money?
So I would probably I would not immediately quit with like a 5% cut, but I would immediately start looking for work, and I would not give 2 weeks notice.
You would probably show up. You would just immediately like look for the out. Yeah.
I'd be on looking at jobs the entire day and stuff because I work at home.
Okay, so your boss says 5%. You say, oh, that's a bummer, but I'll be here tomorrow. And on the side, you're looking for a job. And every single job that you find, once they get your resume, every single one of those jobs, they're going to pay you 5% less than the other people are making. Are you going to go take a different job?
Yeah, it's still change.
You're going to take a different job where where everything's the same.
Yeah.
Where you're still making 5% less.
Yeah. Because I feel like I'll have a better chance of moving up there.
Why would you... Okay. Obviously, my goal in this questioning is to have you put yourself in the position of a woman who's making 95 cents on the dollar. Every job that you've ever worked, it's been the same.
Maybe a question that would make more sense to me is like if I went to my boss and asked for a raise because I knew Jerry, the guy with the same exact experience and background as me, was making 5% more than me, let's say. And he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man. We just gave Jerry that raise. Like, there's no more room in the budget. Like, I'll try and work you in like 3 or 4 months, okay?" And then 3 or 4 months rolls around, and he's like, "Ah, sorry, man. Like, I can't do that. You know, I don't know. Like, at what point would you walk out? Is kind of a good question to me because it's not like, you know, it's not like they're taking something away from you, which is a loss to aversion. It's just that." At every moment, they're not advancing you the way you should be advanced. At every moment, you're a step behind for dumb reasons that don't make any sense.
I think both are actually what's happening. When we look at it, what's happening is you're starting out with 5% less, and then when you go to get more, you're not getting raises at the same rate, and you're not growing.
For sure.
Both of those things are happening. That's what's worse is both of those problems. People are facing both those problems. But if we get closer to the number, that's 95. So anyways, the point is 5% isn't zero. You touched on it a little bit in the beginning. Some people think we can get it to 100. Some people it's not that close. I think give them both credit and we're still back at 95, right? Either if there's no science or if both people are right, you know.
Sure.
I think that's correct. Although I will point out one interesting thing I saw in the numbers, and that is that like the number once you adjust it for education actually gets adjusted in the wrong direction if you're a conservative. Like it actually increases the gap because there are more women with college degrees that match their field, and they still make less money.
Right.
So like that number doesn't help a conservative at all. If you just want to be super conservative, just leave education out. You get like almost to 100%.
You get closer. This is probably a good place to talk about those things. Several of the factors, when we single them out, paint a much worse picture. In fact, unless we were just comparing white men and Asian women, the 95% number is as rosy as it gets. If you are a woman with kids, it's worse. If you aren't white, if you're any race but white and Asian, it's worse. It just goes down the line. It's worse, and then you look at another group in there where, I mean, it's bad all the way across. Except, you know, Asian women, it's like 97 or whatever. You guys maybe remember what the number was. Either way, it's still not 100. Yeah. Starting out worse. When you have a kid, it gets bad. The older that you get, the bigger that the gap is. Like past 55 or something, it takes another steep pike up, which is a group of women who don't have kids at home for the most part, and they're having trouble. So there are many different factors that we can look at and say, if you're not only are you just not if you're a woman, but if you have any of these other things, any of the other additional factors, then you're even worse off. And that number's not coming to 95. So that's when we really see, like, if you're a black woman with a college degree and a kid, you're way off that 95, right?
Right.
So I think it's safe to say that that it's not equal, and we got to figure out why it's not equal.
For sure.
A couple of things, though, that we have to talk about. One, obviously, is childbirth, right?
Yeah. That's one of the bigger ones.
I don't know what you mean. Just kidding.
So, childbirth has an adverse effect on women's earning potential, right?
Yeah.
I was like, do you have anything to say about it?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if we agree or disagree on this stuff. It seemed like before there were more areas we disagreed on that we could maybe zoom to.
More that we disagree more than on the childbirth. The conservative position on childbirth is that's like one of the rosy examples, right? Like, that's one of the things. One of the reasons it's so separated is because of childbirth, and we can't do anything about that. I mean, that's how it's going to be, right? Like, that's a good thing, right? There ought to be a gap in there somewhere if we get these kids off, right?
Yeah, that is the conservative position, which I don't know if they put it exactly that way. So their whole thing is, if you are an employer and you're being told that you have to pay somebody the same amount of money as another person who is at work working for not being there for a year, not working, that's unfair. So
you're talking about maternity leave, paying for maternity leave.
Yeah, maternity leave, yeah. The liberal position is pretty divided on this, too. So some people think that companies should be responsible for this. Some people think that we should, as a country, pool that money and have some sort of safety net that takes care of this. Some people think that it should be even for men and women. Some people don't. So I think the conservative position is mostly a pushback on the idea that the business is responsible for that.
Well, it's a pushback. It's a pushback on the idea that the government would be responsible, right? The idea is, like, some places pay, and if you want to make money on maternity leave, find a company that will pay you maternity leave. But
I guess that's kind of true too,
right?
Yeah.
Or the idea is the reason that we can't all have maternity leave is because it's expensive and it's an unfair burden on a business owner, right?
Right.
Which both of those may be true.
Yeah. So I basically could see the argument that it's a bit unfair to put it on the company. I'm not a huge fan of companies providing healthcare in general, right? There's a lot of strengths to it, and there's a lot of weaknesses to it. So some of the strengths are it gives collective bargaining. That's kind of the argument that was pushed forward when it was proposed that businesses should do it. But some of the weaknesses we can already see, right? Like, it leaves this issue susceptible to conservatives suing the government and then somehow having this overturned and not having to pay certain things for their workers. And then people who are stuck only able to get that job or not getting those services because we told the company they have to do it and because they fought it and kind of won in a little bit. So, like,
you're comparing it to healthcare is what you're saying.
Yeah, so in my world, I just don't think that the companies should be responsible for that. I want to take it out of the out of companies' hands completely. Because if you give companies which are profit motivated a mandate to do a thing like this, they have an incentive to try and figure out how to cheat that system. And I think that is therefore a bad place for it to be. That's all. I think that's especially going to happen when you have racist and sexist people at the top. But even if you had the best people at the top, they're still going to find ways to cheat and kind of scam that system. Now, maybe if it was a perfect world, they would have great healthcare. They would use that as a incentive to get good workers. And some companies do that. Some companies have found a way to do that. But I think there's just as many companies who kind of cheat that system and make it seem like their healthcare is good and then do shitty things with it and fuck people over. And so that's why I personally just don't know if I want it in their hands at all. But, so...
How would it ever not be in their hands, though? Like, that's what I don't get. Like, they're the one... The issue is that there's a pay gap because supposedly the allegations are that there is institutionalized disenfranchisement of women, and they are not being... They're being passed up for promotions. They are not being passed up for raises when their male counterparts are not. And, like, I'm not sure how you fix that unless the government starts paying you paychecks or something like that.
Yeah, so I'm mostly talking about maternity leave. I don't know that I have necessarily a solution for the other part of the problem, like the pay gap part of the problem, besides like better enforcement of current laws and like getting in there and finding the offenders and stuff. Like, I would just say that on the side of like,
I think.
Anyway, go ahead.
I think curiously, like if you look at some numbers that were done in Denmark, which I suspect, as a Scandinavian country, probably has paid maternity leave for its women. The motherhood penalty that we're talking about here is like very, very prevalent there, and you can see as soon as the mom has her first child, her earnings actually plummet. And I suspect that it's because in a country where you have paid maternity leave, but don't have a weird requirement where the employer has to like hold that position available for you while you're out, then you're collecting this paycheck. You stay out for a long time because you're able to get paid and able to do that and take care of your kid, which is good. But that means that since no one's held that position for you, you now have to start over in your career essentially.
Right.
Which is probably why you see this huge plummeting of their earnings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm not sure that government paying for maternity leave is necessarily going to solve the issue.
Yeah, I think there's... I've heard some talk about, like, one of the things that some economists think would help it is having the package be equal for men and women, and if you don't use it, you basically get, like, a bonus or something. I don't know exactly how that works because, like, I don't know what the tenure at the company situation is. Like, if you work for a company for 1 year, take your package, and then leave and move to another company, like, what's going on there? Like, is it are they... I didn't look into this much. I'm just saying, like, there's other ideas out there. Clearly not expert on maternity shit, but, like...
Denmark, that's what Denmark has. They have... You get 52 weeks that can be split between the father and the mother.
Okay.
There's like a couple little, like the women get a couple weeks before and like a certain amount of time directly after, and the guys can take some time in that, and then the rest of it's like most of it is up for grabs between the two.
Gotcha. Okay, so like, are any of us on the side of if you take a year of maternity or something, that the company should be responsible to hire you back? Like, is that a point that we maybe disagree on?
For it, like, if you took a year of maternity leave, should the company have to save your job?
Yeah. Like, are any of us pro that?
I'm pro the idea that the company should have to keep your job during maternity leave, not for one consecutive year, though.
Okay, so like, if it was like a shorter period of time.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your time limit if you just like have a random one? Because I think I agree with you too. I think it's not really the problem is, again, I think that kind of puts some incentive on the company to not hire women because like they're looking at that cost that way, and so it's like problematic. But as a general rule, like I don't think your job should be up in the air because you decide to have a kid and need 3 months off work or something like that. You know, I don't know, Danny. You've been through this 2 times, so do you have any like opinions that you kind of formed from going through it, or?
So I strongly feel that businesses that are, you know, of a size, I don't know, we'll say 10 employees or more, should be required to offer paid maternity leave for at least 3 months. That's what I think.
Okay.
And that they should
for
have to hold your
both?
job while you're out.
For the mother, for both?
For both, the mother and father. I absolutely think that.
Okay.
I think you should be able to offset it with the mom. So, like, if the mom takes 3 months from her work, I should be able to wait until she's done and take my 3 months if I want to. Like, you should have to use it within the first year.
Okay.
And I think that, I honestly do think that if you don't take it, you should get paid for that. Because then the company is not discriminating against men and women based on the amount of money going out. You know what I mean? Like if they're paying a woman for 3 months of maternity leave, she should get that whether or not she leaves, she actually takes it. And the man should too. And then companies just factor this number in when they're hiring men and women, and there's not like an incentive to not hire women because they're more likely to take it or something, or because only women are required to have it.
Well,
yeah, there are
here's
other
the thing, though.
discriminations
If you do that,
leads
what
to,
you're
but
going to
yeah.
do, though, is you're going to strongly incentivize men not to take it, thus ensuring that the pattern of I would rather hire a man because he'll be reliable and stay here working more likely than not.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah, but
true.
but if it's the cost, I mean, if it's the cost, it certainly would be better if you had to pay the money out for both.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I think it might be the better of the two solutions. Maybe like it might meet it in the middle. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it makes the men who stay look better in that situation.
What I would propose is
makes
a way
the
to
women
solve it
look better though,
without
too.
having this still be an issue where we're perpetuating this pattern is
Right.
don't have the company pay the maternity leave directly. Everyone's paying for every active employee they have a certain percentage of a paycheck, like a tax, into something like Social Security.
Right.
It's a national pool. When someone decides to take their maternity leave, they file a claim with it. If they have a kid and they don't file a claim with it, they get paid.
Right.
Right. That way, the company is never like the only thing left now is you can still discriminate on a woman saying it's more likely that she'll have a kid and want to stay out on the maternity leave. But you can still be a dick if you want to do that. But at least you're not monetarily incentivized in any way, and you're not even controlling the purse strings.
That's fair. Do you guys think that incentivizes people to have more kids? Are you cool with that?
Any incentive for people to have kids is bad in my book. Even the fact that kids are cute, I think, is bogus. I think that, I wish that
that's how I feel, and it's like I clearly think
You guys aren't fucking serious, like,
But
in the big picture sense.
No.
You don't-
No.
No.
So like in the big picture sense of dealing with the gender wage gap and gender discrimination and discrimination based on these types of decisions, clearly a bigger issue to me. But if we're actually seriously talking about issues that promote people having kids, then no, I'm not pro promotion of people having kids at all. Like I think it's wrong that you can marry somebody in a platonic way in the past because you were going to have kids together, but you couldn't just like marry a good friend of yours to be life partners to like deal with money together. That was kind of a push to get people together in a monogamous relationship to have kids. It's I'm not even for that. I'm not for anyway. I don't want to get sidetracked by this, but
Right.
if you have like a quick disagreement,
Maybe
I said
some
my
other
piece,
time
so.
we'll have to look at like population graphs for the world and compare it country by country because it quickly demonstrates the fact that like we're not replacing our population even right now,
But
and we're not on the road to get back.
Okay, there are definitely reasons that some of us need to have kids.
yes, we should have this conversation next.
This
time.
is a
That'd be
different
fun.
thing. I think that the question about maternity leave, in my opinion, I think is a smaller part, or is one step down the line. We're not to the maternity leave problem yet. And here's why. The buck on maternity leave is that the women leave the workforce for X amount of time, always for some amount of time, right? Always for some weeks before the baby and sometime after, right? Because there's a hospitalization. Always some.
There are plenty of women that don't get that luxury.
Well, I'm saying that it starts at something. I mean, you.
No, ideally it does, but there are women who literally have to show up to work the next day because they have a shitty welfare work requirement where they don't get a government paycheck if they don't show up to their shitty cashier job the next day.
Okay.
That's a
Okay.
fucking
Okay.
thing, man.
Okay. There are some people who fall into that, but I would say in general, there's an amount of time that a woman has to be at a hospital. Like, if nothing else, you miss that day, right? Some women, though, that time increases. If you have 2 kids or 3 kids in rapid succession, there's a breakover point, depending on how much money you make and where you live. There's a breakover point where childcare is more expensive than it's not worth it to go to work because childcare for X number of kids for X amount of time isn't the same. That it doesn't make sense to go to work because you're losing money, right? That's a problem.
For sure.
We cool?
Yeah, I think we're cool on all that.
Oh, no, I heard something in the background. So,
okay,
so there's a time that they've got to be gone. That adversely affects that job that they have then, where they're moving in that career, especially if they take years off. That's a huge cut because you're at your prime having baby time and you're at your prime moving up in whatever your career is at the same time. It's like a cut and it's at a shitty time. If women had kids when they were 55, maybe it'd be okay, or when they were 14, but now women are doing it in their early 30s. That's a serious problem, right?
For sure.
Okay, but someone has to do it. Someone has to watch the kids. You have to pay for childcare, or at some point somebody has to stay home and watch them if you have multiple kids. When you're making that decision, if it's a man and a woman making that decision, and from the jump, women are making less than men straight out of college, and over time, women are making less than men. If a married couple or an unmarried couple, if a heterosexual couple is having a child and they have to decide, one of us is going to have to take 4 months off of work, or we're going to have a couple kids, so one of us is going to have to take 2 years off work. If you're making a decision between those two, on average, it's going to make sense to have the woman stay home because the couple together is going to lose less money long term. Right?
Yeah, generally speaking.
If it's not even, if everything's not even, then when you make that decision, it makes sense for the woman to stay home.
Right.
Because it's going to cost you less in the long run. So that decision there then leads to less money made over time for women. Then you cut the leg out, and then over time women are staying home more frequently. Women are making less money in the long run. Women are staying at jobs for shorter periods of time, which when you're looking to hire someone, knowing that a woman in her mid-20s to mid-30s is X likely to leave to have children, that gives hiring departments pause, which it should. I mean, strictly on just a strict business sense, if you knew that someone was going to miss 6 months 2 years from now and you knew that somebody else wasn't, it's bad to hire someone who's going to be gone for maternity leave, right? Even if it didn't cost anybody the money.
That's a lawyer listening to your inner monologue. Then you really shouldn't do that.
Correct. I mean, I don't think that it should be done. I'm saying strictly in a business standpoint. I mean, it's better to hire an employee who's going to stay there 50 weeks a year every year for the next 50 years than somebody who might leave out for 5 years.
And so much so that some of the rules have been put in place to attempt to protect women in these situations have kind of backfired. So they've done these studies that show that if it's illegal to ask women whether or not they plan to have children, businesses are more likely to hire less women.
Right.
And so clearly they care a lot about that decision.
Yeah.
Because if even if there's a mystery about it, they're going to hire less of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's kind of two parts of this that are like making both sides are making it worse, right? The loss of time is making it worse, and the fear of hiring someone who's going to lose time makes them less likely to hire. There's like a number of factors that are set against women in the situation where they're looking for progress in this economy.
Well, and as you laid out, the fact that they, on average, start out making less means that there's this very, very gross, like, trickle-down effect where they continually make less, and so by the time they have kids, they're the one in the partnership that is making less, and therefore they're the ones who take the time off. It's like this real perverse system that we've ended up building by accident.
Right. So that's shitty. But I think that
I think there's another thing too, right? So not just the initial hire is impacted, but people are passed up for promotions. They're passed up for raises, for like education opportunities that are available through the company, where maybe they might pay for someone to get a college education. They might be passed up for that because it's seen as a question mark as to whether or not the company will get just as much bang for their buck out of that as they would if they did it for a man.
Yeah, it's problems coming in at the time they have the kid. If one is making less, that's a problem. But also looking forward at what someone can earn over time makes the decision to for the woman to stay home and raise the children more attractive. That's what I'm saying. Both, all of these things make the decision for the woman to stay home more attractive, even when it's not in it's not the desire of the couple having the child.
For sure. I think more men should take maternity leave too, so that it's not as stigmatized.
Yeah, that's why I think maternity leave needs to be covered at the government level. I think until you cover maternity and paternity leave, is paternity both maternity and paternity? Is one of them both?
No, I'm pretty sure paternity is for the penis, and then the maternity is for the mom. Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were going to say vagina.
Yeah. It's meant. Anyways,
that's what it's called, right?
Until those are covered, and until there is some system that relieves the need for parents to leave the workforce to take care of the kids from in the preschool age. Until we figure that out, we're not going to get the highest productivity out of our workforce. And it's going to lead to fucking millions of women who would be good workers not entering the workforce because childcare is crazy expensive. And, especially if you're making 77 cents on the dollar, right? Like, no way you can afford it. It also, in the part that I would worry about most if I was a lady, is all of these problems affect all women equally. Like you were saying before, like if you prevent companies from firing someone or from making hiring decisions based on pregnancy, then women who don't want to get pregnant are still at the mercy of a system that's rigged.
Yeah, for sure. And they're just always doubted constantly. Even if you had a woman who is like, just constantly like, I don't want to have kids. It's like not a thing I want to do. People are going to be like, yeah, but you could.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know that that's not the obviously that's not the conservative position on closing the gap. But it would seem to me that if those are the reasons why the number is the 77 number isn't true or is true but isn't the reality of what's happening, and a bulk of that is directly related to the fact that women carry children and then are in an environment where it makes the best financial sense for them to take care of the child during the early years.
Yep. Well, I think the conservative position is not that that's not real. It's just they don't think it's a problem.
Right. And so why would you solve it by government supported paternity and maternity leave or government supported child care?
Right.
Yeah. You know, one thing I'll point out about those numbers is we try and correct them for those variants, like education, experience, job, and things like that, is that it can create a false impression where, because we are only comparing people that have a similar job for the fiscal year and have worked all year, for instance, in these numbers, it can create a situation where we miss out on in that data the women who didn't get a chance to go into the computer programming job that they might have been able to get into if they were a man, because they're not going to show up as the same occupation. So even though that woman is making less than she might if she were a man in the same working circumstances, it turns out that she's not, and like that gap is not identified in those data when we match them up.
Yeah, what's that
occupation.
called? Like underemployment?
Right,
Yeah.
underemployment. Right,
Underemployment,
where they're not matched up to their skill set.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a huge thing, and it's an easy point to miss because we go through all these numbers in order to make it simple to talk about. We talk about how we're comparing apples to apples, but we have to remember all the things that we're throwing out in order to just compare those apples.
Faux show.
Joe, you said you don't think businesses should be responsible or in control of maternity leave. Who's gonna do it?
The government.
Isn't that a good way for businesses to compete?
Yeah, I mean,
For
I
the
guess.
best workforce?
I don't. That might be. I don't
It
know.
is.
Is there evidence that that's what's happening? That's what's happening.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then, yeah, that's good. I still don't know if that I don't know. I still don't know if that assuages my problems. Just because some companies are using it well doesn't mean that all companies are using it.
I totally agree. And also, the other companies are dicks, and maybe they should just not be fucking dicks and realize what it's like to be a human.
I just, the government doesn't do everything very well, but neither does the open market.
They send checks really well, though. The government is great at sending checks.
They're fantastic at those checking.
They do
checks.
good.
Yeah, so it's just...
That's why I think they could do maternity leave, actually. Honestly.
I don't know. I think they'd be better at it. I could be wrong. That's just my very naive opinion on this, clearly, but...
So you don't think that the free market should be able to solve this problem?
I don't think the free market should be able to solve a lot of problems. So...
Okay.
So I don't think the free market should be able to solve a whole bunch of stuff based on race and gender, right? That's why we have the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act bars the free market from quote-unquote solving that problem because we know that it wouldn't solve that problem. And I have the same issue with democracy, right? Democracy is better than a lot of the systems that used to come before it, but it's still the rule of the majority over the minority. And so we know that minorities are going to be fucked out of that situation. And if the democracy doesn't work perfectly well, we know majorities or people that have more power can corrupt that system, and even kind of a minority can be in charge of the majority. So yeah, that's why we have the Civil Rights Act. The free market is not going to deal with that situation. That's why we need that, for sure.
Where's the line on rules that the free market shouldn't be able to police? If it deals with minority population, free market shouldn't be left to it. If it's a human rights issue, free market can't do it. If it what's the deciding factor between what the free market can and cannot deal with, and why is maternity leave on there? In your opinion,
so
is it when they fuck up? Is it like if we observe you not doing a good job, then
yeah, you guys can handle it until you fuck up. No, you fucked up. No, you're done. You're fucking done with the race thing. No.
Yeah, so it's hard to tell because it really depends on the state of your democracy, right?
Well, I mean, I'm asking you specifically how you decide.
No, this is part of why my answer is just going to be obtuse. Like, if you had asked, I think most Americans 10 or 15 years ago, if some of this, there would be a lot more confidence because things actually got passed occasionally. But now that is just not the case. It's all executive orders and then a whole bunch of people squabbling in 2 rooms. So in times like that, it's hard to say, like, yeah, let's give this power to the government. We'll put out a first draft. We'll see the problems with it, and then we'll move on from there. Because, that's clearly not going to happen. So, yeah, I don't know. It's I think there's some things that in a more perfect free market, more perfect democracy, I would give to the democracy, and that would be, yeah, basic human rights. Things that have to do with minority populations and underserved and underprivileged populations. Yeah, for sure. Just be that. I don't know if there's a line there.
So, maternity leave, though, is what? Is it? Are you just saying maternity leaves for women, and women are in this situation a class that needs some protection, or what?
No, so I'm saying that companies that are forced to give health care because it's a big, complicated issue that most people aren't looking into, it is in the company's best interest to kind of cheat that system. So, like, if there are certain things that are perfect knowledge to the people who are getting the jobs and easy knowledge, it's a lot easier for the balance of power to kind of stay even between the workplace and the worker. But if it's an issue that's really, really complicated, takes a lot of work, a lot of it doesn't ever come up in your life, like, I haven't had to deal with trying to get my company's insurance policy to pay for testicular cancer or something, or a throat cancer, right? It's not only complicated, but it's rare. It's completely foreign to you. That puts a lot of power in the position of the company, right? They have really expensive lawyers that can kind of finagle the system. So I just don't think that is something that should be in their hands, and I put maternity leave in that basket. Maternity leave is a women's health issue. It's also a family health issue, and it's also a men's health issue, or paternity leave anyway. But I would just classify that under that basket. I think that basket is a huge ball of complicated bullshit, and therefore should be in government hands. It's kind of my way of looking at it.
What should the government provide? Here's what I would ask: what level of care can the government provide that would have a direct impact on the gender pay gap? If the government said everybody gets maternity leave, but it's 2 weeks and it's unpaid. Would that have an effect on the gender pay gap, and would that be something that you think the government, is that a system that you would advocate, or does the government need to do 1 year for the man and the woman, or the woman and the woman, or the man and the man, or what's the...
I don't know.
Do you
man.
think maternity? Do
I
you
don't
think
know that I
maternity
have an
care?
opinion.
Do you think that maternity care has an effect on the gender pay gap and should be addressed?
Yes, I do. I don't know that I have looked into that at all enough to form a real numbers opinion. Clearly, even if the government is providing it and you're able to take off a year or more, or 8 months or more, that's still going to impact the business a lot. So I don't think that's going to help the gender pay gap at all, right? But I don't know. There might be a number there. Yeah, I haven't done my due diligence on it, so I don't think I have an opinion. That's, to me, that's way outside of my expertise or even something I've thought much about.
So you don't think that the maternity care is one of the big drivers for the gender pay gap?
No, so I think the big drivers are just it's partially the fact that companies are paying for that, but it's also that they're paying for it without having like a worker there. So I think everything that you can do to even it up for men and women is going to help with that problem. And anything that you can do to take the burden off the company in both situations is going to help with that problem. So those are my basic ideas. I don't have any specifics. I just think that if companies aren't required to pay the maternity and paternity leave, and specifically the maternity leave, since we're talking about the gender pay gap, if companies aren't expected to pay that, God damn it. I hate how easily this pulls out. If companies aren't expected to pay that, there's going to be less discrimination in the workplace. And then if we can find a way for men to take more paternity leave, there's going to be less discrimination.
So, okay, so are you saying that's what you think needs to be done to affect the gender pay gap, or that's just as far as maternity care is concerned, those are the important points?
Okay, so as far as maternity care is concerned, those are the important points that I'm aware of, yes. But some of those things apply everywhere. So it often seems like when people are talking about this issue, they're only targeting one side of it in like a way that I don't entirely understand. And there might be reasons for it. It's not like I'm a fucking genius in this area or anything. But so like, for example, like people... it seems like you might be on this train. People want to identify comparably masculine jobs versus feminine jobs. So something like a lawnmower versus a secretary. And they want to equalize the pay between those two. To me, that's only dealing with one side, and it's possibly dealing with one side poorly. So let's say that what we really want in the workplace is we want as close to 50-50 in every job as possible. We think diversity is important. We think having a masculine and a feminine position, experience, life history, opinions in the workplace, that's important, right? So if that's the case and we raise the female job to the same level as the male job, women are now making more in a job that they felt comfortable with taking in the first place. Where's the incentive for them to leave and go to this other job where we want more female representation?
Wait.
We've got to target...
restate that there. Some part of it was unclear. You're talking about 50-50 representation, or you're talking about...
So I want
you're talking
50-50
So for each job, it's half the lawnmowers are women, half the lawnmowers are men, half the secretaries are women, half the secretaries are men?
Yeah, so I want as close to... I'm not like a dictator on this. A lot of people want it to be 54-49, right? Or 51-49, whatever. I'm not worried about that. What I think is important is approaching as close to that number as possible. I think that type of diversity in the workplace is important.
For your argument, or is for an argument that you're setting up, or that's really how you feel? You think?
No, that's really how I feel,
Okay.
and for
Okay.
the argument that I'm saying.
Okay.
And so that also has to do with positions in the company and pay in the company. So we should also see about 50% managers of both genders. So anyway, I say this because when I'm thinking about it like that, and when I know other people are thinking it about like that, they tend to propose solutions, as far as I can tell, that seem one-sided. So they want to identify lawnmowers who are making $25,000 a year, let's say, and secretaries that are making $20,000 a year, and they want to start paying those secretaries $25,000. I think that is going to cause those women to not want to leave that position. That position is better for them now, right? I think we have to target both sides of it. We have to do something that causes men to want to leave male-dominated fields and enter female-dominated fields, and females to leave female-dominated fields and enter male-dominated fields. And if we're just doing this one thing of raising the comparable job for women, I don't think it's doing that, and it seems like only half the problem. So I'm saying that about maternity and stuff because I also think it's important to target men and try to get them to leave the workplace more often and go be with kids, because that is going to make the discrimination decision less easy, right? If more men are taking paternity leave, then there's not as much of a difference between men and women, and there's not as much of an excuse now, and there's not as much of a mentality now. So that's all I'm trying to say.
That's wild, but how are you going to get a lawnmower to go be a secretary if they're making if they'd have to take a $5,000 pay cut?
Oh, I think Joe was laying out his argument for affirmative action. Basically, is what it sounded like to me. Actually,
No, so I don't think
didn't
it's
sound
not
like affirmative
well,
action.
it depends what you mean by affirmative action.
so like where you set up a system where a company is incentivized to find a man to hire for this female-dominated position.
Yeah, so
because they don't currently have a man working in that position.
Yeah, so I don't think it should be the company, although that is already the law. So I mean, like, it's whatever.
Well,
but
it's the law that you have to pay lawnmowers the same, but it's not the law that a lawnmower and a secretary have to be paid the same.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
sure,
not the
sure.
law that someone's checking you periodically to see how many women you have in lawn mowing positions to make sure that you're approaching that 50% limit when you can.
Right. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be 50-50 or anywhere close. It's just if you have men and women, you have to pay them both the same if they're both mowing yards.
I don't think that's entirely true. So it depends if you're a private company or a government agency. So government agency have more strict affirmative action rulings than private companies do.
Okay, but those aren't laws; those are policies they're following.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Okay.
So anyway, so like to me, like something that would make more sense that I think targets both sides of the coin is like offering an incentive to both genders for going into what am I trying to say?
The male or female-dominated
Yeah,
field.
the male or female workforce role, and I think that targets both sides. Now, of course, like with anything, there's weaknesses to that. What if we see that like only men are taking these incentives and like then just taking over female-dominated positions and pushing those women out? Or what if the system gets corrupted and is just as sexist as any other system, and these incentives are only being rewarded to men and not to the women?
It also creates a
like,
weird incentive for people not to stay in a job, right? Like if I have even a good job in a female-dominated field, but I find another job that's okay in a female-dominated field, well, I'll switch jobs, because if I get a $1 raise, then I qualify for this government program. I get a nice big check in the mail.
So I would not. Oh wait, you're talking about a man who's like worked in one female-dominated
switching from one
position and
female,
switching-
or maybe he switches to a male-dominated just to switch.
Oh, it's
back.
like hopping
You
around.
could do, like, it
Yeah, that's
creates this
problematic
perverse
for sure.
incentive.
Yeah.
That's why affirmative action was actually from the company's perspective, I think, is that it doesn't create that incentive.
Yeah, so one of the issues with affirmative action, though, is it's insanely vague and it's not data-driven. And this is kind of part of the problem with the liberal side, is that we don't agree on what actually works or what we should actually be doing or what some of the problems are.
Let's call it the concept of affirmative
Yeah,
action.
yeah,
is
yeah.
what I meant, right? The idea of incentivizing company to maybe don't find another white guy for that software programming.
Yeah,
job.
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Affirmative action's been pretty good.
Yeah.
Just not the way. It's like a roundabout way.
Yeah, and there's huge problems with it too. Like holes is a better way to put it. There's ways that it could be seriously improved on.
Right.
But yeah,
but the
otherwise
general
I have to-
idea of like no black guys get good jobs. Fast forward
Versus-
quite a while after affirmative action, a lot better jobs for some people. Like the general idea of like trying to get over the institutional racism, like worked pretty good. Not great for either side, but better place now
Better than it
than
looked
we
like
were.
it was going to. That's for sure.
Yep.
So that's wild. So you think if we mix, you think the sex segregation is a problem, and we need to mix the guys into the girl positions and the girls into the guy positions,
Yeah,
and that's going to work on, and
uh,
that's going to be better for gender pay gap.
I would say as
Also
much as
give-
possible. Just to be clear, I think that like quotas are already considered illegal by the U.S. government for good reason. Although, again, problems in all directions. But anyway, like quotas are illegal. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that workplace diversity is important. Diversity of ideas, diversity of gender, diversity of race, diversity of background, diversity of nationality.
Yeah, you're not proposing a way to do that necessarily. You're just saying that is how, if we could figure out how to do that, that would be the solution.
Yeah, I'm proposing a very naive view of what I think would maybe help with that. Is on the gender line.
I think another big thing is like flex schedules, right? So if both men and women, if companies were incentivized to offer their employees flexible work schedules whenever possible, it'd be way less of a burden on the woman of the family to take time off to do childcare or find a job that maybe pays less but offers a flexible schedule.
Yeah, so that to me is actually super important. Like, if jobs were to equalize their flexibility, if jobs were to equalize the things that men and women are searching for when they're searching for jobs, then I think that would help a lot too. So like, I don't know that I know a lot of ways to like really propose that, but I think flexibility would be a perfect one, right?
Yeah,
like,
give a company a report card every year for how flexible their work arrangements are. Same thing you could do for how diverse their company is.
What about
Right.
all of the jobs that can't do that?
yeah, it's
So again, like the more jobs you have, the worse you're going to have a score. The worse your score will be on that annual report card. But then again, if you also have a very diverse employee workforce, then you might get a better score in that regard. You know.
So I think some of what's happening is that there are actually different concerns between different people on the left, and some of what is happening is just the priorities are different, right? So like, but the problem is some of the incentives that are out there are maybe hurting one of these priorities while helping one of these priorities, and so to conservatives that seems batshit. It seems like we're shooting ourselves in the foot and being like hypocritical and stupid. To me as a liberal, it just means I wish we could be more so on the same page and kind of like, I don't know. I wish I could be more educated on this and know why some things are prioritized by some people and not. But like, to me, the diversity is really important. So while I think that the idea of like raising female centric jobs wages higher, female dominated jobs wages higher is great at a first glance, I think it also hurts one of the other issues. And I don't know if that is a complete reason to not do it. Like maybe we correct the wages and then also do another thing, or like whatever. But it just it seems pretty clearly counterintuitive, I guess, on that.
I wonder if there's like some I wonder if there's some confusion on that. Let me okay, so I would favor a system that did a better job of comparing men's and women's labor. But what I'm in favor of isn't what you're talking about. And I wonder, I don't mean to say that you're getting it wrong, because you might be talking about something that's different. You might be getting something else right, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But,
by the way, the fireworks are starting, so I think let's close it up just for podcast noise safety reasons. Anyway, go ahead with what you're saying, though.
Okay, so that one of the problems that I think, one of the some of the static that's in there, and one of the issues that are affecting the gender pay gap, is that we value women's work less than we value men's work. So the idea isn't necessarily that lawnmowers make more money than secretaries, or that there are some jobs that men do where they make more money and some jobs that women do where they make less money. The problem is that in fields that are and have historically been heavy female jobs, and in fields that have historically been heavy male, the male jobs are paid higher than the female jobs, and not compared. The idea is that they're apples and oranges. The idea is that a lawn mowing job and a secretary job aren't the same at all. And so we pay more for the lawn mowing job because that's how much you pay a lawnmower, and you pay less for the secretary because that's what you pay for the secretary, without comparing them. And there is a movement, which has been going on for like 30 years, to find a way to compare different jobs that aren't exactly the same. So it's like we can look and say two engineers at the exact same company who went to the exact same school, have worked the exact same amount of time, and are in the exact same position. We can compare those two, both of their paychecks. It's easy to do that and tell if they're the same. But it's different when jobs are slightly different, or even sometimes appear to be wildly different. So
I'm definitely not disagreeing with you. All I'm saying is that some of the methods that are proposed to solve that problem potentially shoot the diversity problem in the foot. That's it.
Okay, so the
if you think diversity is more important, that's probably a big problem, right? But if you think making those jobs more equal in their pay and valuing women's work more is a bigger issue, then it's not a problem. It's okay to shoot the diversity thing in the foot.
Well, and I guess that's why I brought up the thing about why would a lawnmower be a secretary. So what they do is they look at it, and there's a couple factors. What kind of problem solving skills are necessarily, what kind of responsibility do you have, what's the working condition like? There's a couple of things that they use. They give them scores, and they try to compare jobs that are closer. If the secretary job, or if any field, and when they've done these studies, it's like just a clear bar in between them. Guys, jobs that score the same, where one is a male job, one is a female job, the male jobs are always paying more. If the female job if the women are getting paid less, then you have to put in an incentive for the guy to go take that job. And if women wanted to do the male job, they might already be doing it. Like, there's a bit of self-segregation, especially we're talking about things like flexibility. There are biological differences, right? If the job is like rock breaker, it would be slightly more difficult for a woman to be a rock breaker than a guy, maybe. Just whatever reason that there is some separation, getting women to go to the men's job and men's to go to the women's job, if they have to either go to a job they don't want or take less money, it's really hard to move people in that. But if the jobs that took similar skill paid similarly, then the decision between which you would want to do would be based just on what you wanted to do or what fit best in your life. Like, are we going to pay every secretary, every man who comes to be a secretary, if we give him a financial incentive to move, then we have a man who's a secretary who's making more than a woman who's an actual secretary, right? If we incentivize men to move, then they're going to be in the exact same field and making more.
Yeah, so I think that you kind of have that problem with the same thing that you just proposed, though. Like, if you equalize this male and female position, it gives men more incentive to move into that other position.
Well,
and so they can displace women, right?
I think he wasn't quite saying... So he wasn't laying out the kind of argument that you had laid out where, like, let's find all the secretaries and they're not making as much as our lawnmowers, so we'll pay the secretaries more to bring them up. He wasn't saying that. He was saying, like, so here's a computer programmer and here's a patent lawyer. While they may not have very similar jobs on face value, their skill sets are the same. They require the same number of hours per work week and experience level and stuff. So we could call those basically the same and expect that they would get paid roughly the same, and use that as a way to compare across companies. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, if these female jobs pay better, great. I mean, I'm not objecting to that notion, but doesn't that provide the incentive for men to come into those positions and displace women?
Yeah, but we want that because we want women going into the male dominated jobs.
See, I don't think it deals with that side of the coin, because I think that we've shown that it's very easy to displace women and not as hard to displace men.
In general, in a closed system, it would have to work that way. But you know what I mean? If any man who went to be any male lawnmower who went to be a secretary would create one job in the lawn mowing field in a closed system or in a perfect system. But the desire to have women in the men's job would have to be based on the woman wanting to do the man's job and wanting to get the man's job. The idea of having 50 and 50 isn't a focus of this plan. The possibility for diversity is what's important, not getting actual diversity. This plan recognizes that there are some jobs that women prefer and some jobs that men prefer, and in those fields, women will dominate the field that women prefer and men will dominate the field that men prefer. But we will value X amount of labor and X amount of skill the same, so that men that want to work in the female job can move, and women aren't shut out of the male job because they're having to compete against men. They'll be seen, on a similar plane. But again, the diversity isn't the issue. It's the closing the gender pay gap that in this system is caused because we're simply paying women less for doing the same work. That's not the exact same work. It's just comparable.
Right.
It's specifically comparable. And
I think this is
which they've done.
Least...
I'm sorry?
I'm going to say this is the least offensive podcast I think we've done so far. There's only like a few sound bites towards the beginning that could really fuck people up.
Yeah, I think it's the scariest, though.
So to me,
I think that's why it's least offensive. It's the scariest.
Yeah, it's like we want to be more serious about it because we actually care a lot. Go ahead. Jay, sorry.
I was just gonna, try and put a cap on it. To me, for my perspective is concerned, I was just gonna say that I think that trying to incentivize people to switch into like a role or a position that's dominated by the opposite gender seems really complicated trying to, because I can't think of a good way to actually functionally do that.
He's gonna wreck it on the last
I guess
one.
maybe like a bonus for like a first time move to such a job or something like that.
Yeah, there's definitely some
Um,
complications. Yeah.
But the idea of like trying to like raise the secretary's pay just to get it in line with the lawnmower, that seems just out and out crazy to me personally. It seems like
Even if the secretary's
market-
been like systematically underpaid.
well, so I don't think that getting men into the secretarial role will automatically solve the problem, and I don't think that automatically just giving those women who are currently secretaries a huge pay increase is going to properly incentivize them to be good workers and continue
Properly
pursuing their
incentivize
career
them.
paths. So, to me, it seems like our focus would be way more effective if it were just on paid maternity leave for everyone who has a kid, both man and woman, both partners, and it would be incentivizing companies to do flexible work arrangements and publishing some sort of a annual report highlighting the best companies in the country that do the best job at that, and also trying to incentivize diversity not through money but rather by again, publishing something like a report card that shows the best companies to work for, the most diverse companies out there, and helping them out that way. I think that would be probably number one, just from a political perspective, maybe feasible as compared to some of the other options. And we get back to like the number of days that you get off for paid maternity, and I would put that probably at like at least 3 months, but that would still put us way behind the rest of the industrialized world. So I think that those are all at least feasible compared to let's find a way to raise all the secretaries' pay or something by X dollars.
I have opinions that I expressed and otherwise claim general ignorance. Trey, any last comments you have?
No, the one thing we left out though was that we had Obama put a rule on the books that companies, I think 50 or more people, were going to have to start submitting in their EEO-1 form. They had to show what the gender differences were on pay scale, so they didn't have to They had to say like we have X amount of coders and this many are men and this many are women, and this is where the women's pay is and the men's pay is, so that we could start really looking at comparing this problem and really seeing what the differences are between men and women. And also because there is a body who is responsible for enforcing these laws, but there isn't a body that's able to figure them out. We have to wait for people to come forward and say it. So it was going to give us a way to really see the EEO-1 form, and they've decided, surprise, that they're not going to require that from companies anymore. So that's not going to happen.
Definitely got rid of that exec.
Yep.
And his daughter was like, "Good choice, bro."
Yeah, something about how it was way better for women if we didn't figure out which of them specifically were getting the shaft. So that's where we're at with the reporting.
Oh, you said we're done? Cool.
That's it.
What was that? I can't see what he's doing. What are you laughing at?
Oh, I think he is about to hit stop. So you should do that too.
I thought he just said we're done recording. I haven't hit stop yet, though.
Who said we're done recording?
Oh, I thought maybe I got a weird artifact in my earphones there.
Sound like we're done recording.
I thought you were trying to be funny,
No.
and you were like, "Oh, you said we're done, cool," like trying to like beat the clock type thing, which I thought was like a perfectly funny way to end it. So I'm cool with that.
Yeah, all this is going to be cut. Just any.
Alright, well, I am just going to hit stop.
That's it. that is all you get for this week. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you enjoyed it. We sure had fun getting into it. I mean, as much fun as you can have talking about a perplexing and debilitating social illness. We are going to be back next week. For now, although we're done with this little show, we're still interested in discussing the issue. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, you can get us on Twitter, Facebook, at our Patreon site, everywhere, online, at A Strong Disagree. We would love to hear from you. So enjoy yourselves. Enjoy your weekend. Be good to one another. And for the rest of the evening, I'm going to leave you with a little song from the Fixers Red.